I will tell you that as someone who has lived in South Florida all his life, when there was a giant storm once upon a time, Hurricane Andrew, Brian Norcross was someone who soothed me and the people of South Florida. John Morales has been doing this for South Florida for a long time. He is South Florida's very own meteorologist. He is a three-time Emmy Award winner for NBC6. He's been doing it for 40 years now, and in some ways today, he's America's weatherman, because on Monday night, a lot of people noticed the fear and emotion of a meteorologist looking at a storm that is sure, that is hell-bent on uncommon and close to unprecedented destruction that is headed to the west coast of Florida. And let's play that video for the people again so they can see and hear for themselves the fear inside of John Morales as he looks at what this storm is about to do to the west coast of Florida.
It's just an incredible, incredible, incredible hurricane. It has dropped 50 millibars in 10 hours. I apologize. This is just horrific. The seas are just so incredibly, incredibly hot, record hot, as you might imagine. You know what's driving that. I don't need to tell you. Global warming, climate change, leading to this and becoming an increasing threat.
John, thank you for joining us. I want soothing from you. I don't believe you're about to give it to us, though. Can you tell us what is happening with you there as you see what is about to happen here to the west coast of Florida?
Well, it could become the hurricane of record for many locations on the west coast of Florida. The angle of approach, the intensity, and the expanding wind field are going to lead to a very deep storm surge that's going to impact not just a small percentage of the coast. For example, Ian in 2022, which was extremely impactful in terms of storm surge depth, but Ian only impacted southwestern Florida. Here, we're talking about a hurricane that could impact half of the west coast or the Gulf Coast of the state of Florida, and therefore the damage would be much more widespread in terms of what the storm surge can do, and we all know what the storm surge can do, in addition, of course, to the windstorm, to the tornadoes, and to the flooding rains.
What is more dangerous here, John, the storm surge or the winds?
Well, the storm surge it tends to cause more property damage and claim more lives than the wind will do. So while the wind is scary, you can hide from the wind, but you must run from the water. You must run from the water.
Can you explain to us the historic precedent on 10, 12, 15 feet of storm surge?
Well, I mean, so the 15 feet, 10 to 15 feet is being forecast in general for the Tampa Bay area, as well as points just south of there, including Sarasota. If you go back, as far as we have records of, what has impacted that region going back to the 19th century, this would surpass any and all records in terms of the depth of the storm surge. Now, a caveat here. This is greatly dependent on the exact track of the hurricane. So if the eye crosses Greater Tampa, or just to the north of Greater Tampa, you will see that materialize. If it passes just south of the Greater Tampa area, then that'll materialize further down the coast. But in Tampa, they would have dodged a bullet.
Can you explain to us how far inland the ocean will eat land when you're talking about that kind of storm surge?
Well, one of the complications about Tampa Bay, of course, is that, it's a bay, and there are, different channels and rivers that feed into that area, and you'll see the water creep up through there and be able to penetrate further inland. That's what happened during Hurricane Ian, when there was a significant surge many miles inland. That's something I've looked at very carefully in my role as an expert meteorologist in litigation, right? I mean, there's a lot of weather that gets litigated in this state And the storm surge is something I've studied very carefully for Ian, and it got far, far inland.
John, earlier on the show, we played a clip of the mayor of Tampa warning everyone, if you stay, you're going to die.
In evacuation areas.
In evacuation areas. Do you want to echo that sentiment?
Well, so, I mean, for Helene, people died, right? So I most definitely will echo that sentiment. You should heed evacuation orders. Try to set American individualism, this feeling that is part of our culture, try to set that aside for a second and save yourself and your family. You'll worry about the property later, but it's important to leave the coast because nobody can survive a 15-foot storm surge.
Did you see the Marjorie Taylor Greene where she said that they can control the weather? Was that you that's the they, or was it we who are the they?
Yeah. Let me just say, I mean, it is sad to see the state of affairs, and I've written about this, and I invite folks to read my columns in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist. I know that's super geeky, about as geeky as me losing it over 50 millibars of pressure drop yesterday.
Not geeky.
But I've written about this era, this post-truth era that we're living in, and you see how that type of comment just gets picked up and spread like wildfire in this era that we're living in. It is so massively counterproductive. We are not controlling the weather. The weather is the weather, and the extremes of weather are getting worse because of the warming climate. This was all forecasted. This is all consistent with what you would expect in a warming world, and it's part of my frustration between that and empathy for the future victims of the hurricane and angst over the multiplication of extreme weather events. All that combined yesterday to lead to that moment, which I wish hadn't happened, but I guess I'm human.
But in plain terms, John, because the layman doesn't understand what 50 millibars of pressure means, but I've been watching this over the last 5 days, and we were a little bit over 1,000, and forecasters were worried about just that. And so I'm imagining that what's making you emotional is, at least in part, oh my God, we've underestimated this thing. Planes are now giving us new information. What is happening in layman's terms when you're having that reaction to 50 millibars of pressure?
It's the opposite. It's the fact that we knew this would happen. Rapid intensification was explicitly called for by the National Hurricane Center on this hurricane. Yeah, they said it would stop at 4. It got to 5 like this. You got to keep in mind, it went from a Cat 1 to a Cat 5 in a span of 18 hours. And we woke up Sunday morning with a mundane 50-mile-per-hour tropical storm. And here I am, moments from going on air on NBC6, and that breaking news from the National Hurricane Center comes across just that second, indicating that it had become a Category 5. I looked at the pressure, I did the quick math in my head, and I go, 50 millibars of pressure drop in 10 hours? That's just, it just blows your mind. And it was just the realization that here we are again, another rapidly intensifying hurricane. This is happening much more often. It's going to impact so many people, not just in 2024, but for years to come, with more and more hurricanes doing this. And it's just a sad situation that we have to find a way to adapt to, but it's hard to adapt to the rapidly changing climate.
John, the way weather is getting so much more extreme, so much more dangerous, is it inevitable that people in your line of work are going to have to come up with a Category 6 because hurricanes are going to get worse and worse over time?
Yeah, so that's a good question. But generally speaking, you'll find a consensus amongst meteorologists that there's no need for that. And I've got a very brief explanation of why that is. When you look at the Saffir-Simpson scale, Category 1, 2, all the way through 5, and you look at what to expect in a Category 4 versus a Category 5, and the word that is used for each one of those two categories is catastrophic. So is there something beyond catastrophic? I mean, what would we assign for potential damage from a Category 6? So In other words, once you get to Cat 4 and above, it's a catastrophe in the making, and I think that's the way we need to look at these things.
First, I want to say, John, I'm a big fan of yours. I've been following you since I moved to South Florida 4 years ago, and have really appreciated your sort of steady and calming perspective on all of the sort of weird weather incidents we've had down here since I moved here. So I wanted to thank you. And second, I wanted to ask you, are sports podcasters essential workers?
Yes. Yes. So Jeremy, you're in trouble and you got to do more Marlin stuff for me. Okay.
I got you, John.
Not the answer they wanted, though. They wanted the next couple.
I was being serious.
They wanted
Go home.
They wanted the next couple of days off, and John Morales, who you praised a lot at the beginning of that as an expert,
doesn't know what he's talking about.
just told you that you're an essential worker. John, can you explain to me, please, the best case and worst case scenarios that you are forecasting here? A jog to the south. What are the best and worst case scenarios, with the understanding that wherever this hits, it's going to be catastrophic?
I mean, I would think that the best case scenario is for this to hit south of Naples, right? And then the storm surge would be limited to Florida Bay. But of course, that's bad news for the Florida Keys, right? So like you just said, I mean, if it doesn't hit one, it hits another. But the thing about that scenario that I just described is that you wouldn't have the mass infrastructure that is present from the Southwest Florida corridor all the way up through Tampa, where it's just city after city after city. When there's things in harm's way, that's how you end up with these big property losses. And think of the human element of this. And I think that's part of what happens to me when I'm talking about these extreme weather events. You know how many people don't have flood insurance? You know how many retirees were in Florida during Hurricane Ian? That, they saved their entire lives. They wanted to move to Florida. They moved to a double wide, in a mobile home park because, that's what they could afford. And then everything gets wiped out and you lose absolutely everything and there's no insurance to cover for that. Well, I mean, that's going to happen yet again. So that would be one good scenario. The other one would be for it to lose strength, but warning, hurricanes that reach Category 5 and then lose strength and arrive at the coast as a Category 2 or Category 3, it's too late. Everything is already baked in. This wind field is growing. The buildup of the waves that generates the storm surge as it piles water towards the coast, that's already being cooked as this system is a Cat 4 and a Cat 5. So it's going to be difficult to avoid another multi-billion-dollar disaster.
Do you think, John, and I don't wish to fearmonger here, but I just want your expertise, are you concerned that this is the storm of your lifetime?
Unfortunately, and sad to say, there's going to be more, right? Helene was the storm of a lifetime for Western North Carolina. Ian was the costliest in the history of Florida. Andrew was the storm of a lifetime for folks in southern Dade County. And that PTSD is still present today. Listen, I was on TV as well in South Florida during Hurricane Andrew. Norcross was doing it in English. I was doing it in Spanish. So I lived that. And the trauma of having to survive a hurricane of that nature is something that scars you for life. And that's why people get so nervous. Whoever survived a major hurricane gets really nervous when anything is brewing out there in the Atlantic. And I have empathy for that. That's why I've always tried to be the non-alarmist. But these weather extremes, man, it's so hard to remain non-alarmist when what we're seeing is just off the charts.
Andrew is the worst of my lifetime, but it didn't have this storm surge.
That's right. So the storm surge was 14 feet. You might recall what was left of the Burger King headquarters down there in Palmetto Bay, which was not much. building got gutted and then eventually got rebuilt. But many communities along the coast of Biscayne Bay got absolutely swamped by that storm surge. But it was a very compact hurricane. This one is going to be much wider with its wind field, and that's why the impacts are going to hurt so many people.
South Florida specifically, what are you forecasting for South Florida?
Right. So the good news is this is one of the better places to be in the state in terms of impacts. One thing that'll be different from Helene is that because the wind field is expanding, I would anticipate sustained winds to be stronger. Sustained now. There's a difference between sustained and gusts. Sustained needs to average that velocity for an entire minute. And I would anticipate sustained winds to be somewhere in the 30s. 35 miles an hour or so at times, with gusts to 50, 55 miles per hour. So that's why a tropical storm warning has been issued for our area. They are expecting tropical storm conditions as well. Let's not discount the risk of isolated tornadoes. It's still raining. It's raining out my door right now. There is a risk for flooding rains amongst all this. So please keep that in mind. The only good thing that we're escaping is the storm surge. The Florida Keys might have one, but it looks like the southeast coast of Metro Miami and Metro Fort Lauderdale will get to avoid a significant storm surge.
Shifting gears here for just a second. John, you are Woody Johnson, and Bill Belichick calls you today. What do you do?
Well, so apologies.
He's the Jets owner. He should have told you that. He's the
Jets owner.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah,
you're welcome.
Thought he knew.
Yeah, Jeremy knows this. I'm a baseball guy, Marlins.
Yeah, John, my apologies because you've probably been busy with a much bigger story here. Robert Saleh, the Jets coach, was fired. Woody Johnson is the Jets owner. Bill Belichick is a free agent. So I am making you in this scenario, Woody Johnson, and Bill Belichick. You already fired your coach. Bill Belichick, free agent Bill Belichick, calls you today. What do you do?
What do I do? Yeah. And what does this have to do with a hurricane?
Turns on postseason baseball instead.
It's my own personal storm,
Thank
John.
you for being on with us, John. We appreciate your time. It's just what I work with. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you for being on with us. Appreciate your general expertise at all times, sir.
You're the greatest.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome for 03.
He wasn't talking to you, Samson. He wanted to talk to only Jeremy. He was purposeful about ignoring you. Greg Cody, as a lifelong South Floridian, as you watch this thing, and I know that over the last couple of months, I have really annoyed people talking about this stuff because I don't want the real world coming to us, but I just don't know what to do with the idea that the Tampa Bay might have 15 feet of storm surge because it's just going to take out so much property and anybody who is there if that's where it hits.
You feel guilty feeling good that it's not hitting you because you know that means it's hitting
This is the
someone
new
else.
and unimproved Dan Le Batard Show with the Stugotz. Gamble on by DraftKings.